and with Dan Booker. Today we're going to continue on with Sheriff in a Small Town. Now, I did some checking. I do have the next chapter, Cold Cases, on here already. However, I was just writing it. I was just starting to write that chapter when I put it out. So it's not complete. So we're going to do the complete chapter, and let me get to it. I know it's in here. Hold on. There it is, Cold Cases. H reporter Rocky Stone of the Sentinel was leafing through the Cold Cases files in Sheriff Morgan's office. The sheriff was now on his own until he could find a new deputy. His last one had quit after Morgan had been forced to give him a dressing down. Now the sheriff was working days and some evenings again. He was diligently looking for someone to replace former Deputy Cooper, but having a hard time finding one he could trust. Rocky was trying to find a case worthy of doing a write-up on. Might be possible to solve some of these cases if we wrote them up and got people involved. Unfortunately, most were not very interesting from a newsman's perspective. Missing clothes off people's clothesline, food being taken off windowsills where pies and breads had been set to cool. These were usually attributed to tramps, and the case went no further. Also were files on petty pilfering at the dry goods store. Usually a comb, maybe a razor or two, a Burma shave tube. The storekeeper wasn't keen on making a fuss over such small things, and these too had been set aside. However, there was one file that intrigued him immediately. It was a missing person file. Rocky read the file with growing inclination to take it on. The missing person was a former Marine named Jack Wheeler, 5'7", 145 pounds, tattoo on his right arm of an anchor, dark hair, scar on his right cheek. Picture was included, it wasn't the clearest. It looked as if it had been taken in one of the photo booths at the druggist. The information provided was minimal. Last seen going out for some groceries and never returned. No money had been taken from the bank account, and his wallet was found on the dresser. He had taken a handful of silver dollars to shop with and had walked up to the store. He never made it to the store, and the file had been handed off to the state police. Sheriff, mind if I borrow this file? I'd like to do a write-up on it and see if I can get anything going. Sheriff Morgan looked the file over and shrugged. Yeah, go ahead, but I remember sending it off to the state police after I couldn't make any headway. They never made much of it either, that I recall. Been about 6 months, maybe just a bit more, since he disappeared, so I don't know what we'll be able to add to this. He rifled through the pages and passed it back to Rocky. Go ahead and do the write-up and let me know if anything comes of it. You may want to visit his wife first and see how she feels about having this dragged out into the open. May raise some sore spots, poor kid. Morgan went back to his papers and Rocky went off to speak to the man's wife. Checking his watch, he saw it was just after 10 a.m. Not a bad time for visiting hours. The house from the outside had seen better days. Paint was peeling and the porch railings were loose. What he could see of the inside, though, was still solid and seemed clean. Knocking at the door, he shouted at the screen, "Ma'am, I'm Rocky Stone from the Sentinel. I'd like to speak with you, please." A shout of 1 minute was heard from the back of the house, and Rocky leaned against the porch railing to wait comfortably. Footsteps tapped lightly forward, and faces began to appear at the screen. 3 boys, 1 girl, and a baby in the arms of a young woman of 25. She was attractive, but he could see that she had been intense lately. Long, dark hair streamed down to her waist. Her figure was thin and her face lined with worry. When she smiled, though, her eyes glowed and the lines softened. Rocky heaved himself off the railing and uttered a yelp as the cracking was heard from the railing. He plummeted backwards, taking the rail and the post with him. He landed with feet in the air and the sound of laughter in his ears. The mother was trying to shush the children, but her face was twitching to hide her own laughter. Rocky picked up the wood pieces and stacked them, promising he'd fix the porch before leaving. The screen door opened and Rocky was ushered inside. Thanking her, he waited until she and her brood were seated before occupying a chair himself. Sorry about the railing. Like I said, I'll fix it before I go. Don't worry about it. It was about to fall apart anyways. I read your pieces in the Sentinel, so I know you sometimes write the crime column. She shrugged. Am I supposed to be involved with a crime of some sort? Rocky held up a placatory hand. No, ma'am. I just want to talk to you about, he looked at the children's faces and wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. A cold case I came across recently. She breathed a sigh of relief and took the children into the kitchen. With PB&J sandwiches and lemonade, they would be content for a while. She placed the baby in a crib and with a bottle and returned sitting close to Rocky. Thanks for putting it the way you did. The children still cling to the thought of their daddy coming home. Rocky felt embarrassed as he started asking questions. Do you have any idea why your husband might have disappeared? No, the fact that he left everything here and just went missing makes me think he might have met a bad end, or why or how, I have no clue. She picked up a picture from the coffee table and looked at it. I know things were stressing him. Having 4 children and one on the way made him a little overwhelmed. She looked up quickly and stressed that he always made sure they had food and that the bills were paid. I've been able to eke out what he left and to get by on, but I know it's not going to last forever. Hopefully I can get a part-time job soon to make it last longer. Right now I do some typing for a few of the businesses, and that helps. She looked over at a desk with piles of papers and an old typewriter covered with a dishcloth. Did he have any tattoos? Her head snapped back with an amazed expression. They didn't even ask. He was a Marine. Of course. Sorry, so let's see. Anchor, eagle, or motto? An anchor. They spoke for a while longer as he asked about his walk, manner of address, and other personal characteristics, until the children finished their lunch and required her attention. As Rocky had left, she agreed to let him see what he could find at the door. At the door, she requested to keep her informed. Grabbing some tools from her shed, he quickly rebuilt the railing, making a mental note to come back and see if anything else needed repairing. Back at the Sentinel, he went over his idea with the editor to report on a cold case and see if he could make any headway on solutions. You're not a detective or a deputy. Bear that in mind when you're working on these. Your authority as a newspaper man won't carry much weight. But considering your clearing up of the last piece went over big, I guess I can give you a free hand. Just remember to call in the proper authorities if you think some things are going to get you in deep. The editor reached out and shook Rocky's hand. Rocky was free to work on his own again. Excuse me, one second. Seated in the sheriff's office, they were tucking into a fried chicken lunch Agnes had brought in the basket. As they ate, they discussed his interview. Where do you expect to go from there? Rocky dropped a clean picked leg bone on the wastebasket and considered the question. Well, I've got a good idea of what he looks like. Pretty good idea of the type of man he was, and a fair idea of what may have happened to him. Agnes almost choked on a biscuit. You got that already? She was incredulous, and Rocky figured Rocky must have been joking. No, I'm serious. He emphasized his points with taps on the desk. He was a standout Marine, what they call a recruiting poster type. That means that certain traits are going to be ingrained in him since they were probably there already before he joined. He has a tattoo, which he was very proud to have, and if he were, then he's probably not going to cover it up. He might just incorporate it into another, though. He left all the money in the bank and didn't take the car. I have to feel, despite what he did, that he's still honorable and may be regretting his decision, with no idea how to set things straight. Morgan rested back and more comfortably in his chair and considered what Rocky had said. Well, if that's so, then he might be somewhere in or on the outskirts of town right now. He's probably disguised. I'd figure on a full beard and mustache, pretty pretty full by now, if they aren't false. Might have put on weight, too, on purpose. Morgan did some hard thinking. He looked up to see Rocky and Agnes intent on him to see what he might suggest. He shook his head no. Rocky, you started this, and if I spout off now, I might be robbing you of figuring out this out. Fact is, I may be setting you on the wrong tack by what I've already said. You work it out. I'll be here either to assist or handle the capture if needed, but frankly, I'd like to see you do this as much on your own as possible. Agnes squeezed both their hands tightly. She was proud that her father was letting Rocky work things out on his own, and proud that Rocky was handling things intelligently. She cleared up lunch and set off home to take care of her own tasks. Then she'd be free to enjoy some time at the lake fishing. Rocky made some notes regarding what the sheriff had said and decided to walk around town. Looking around, he had never realized how many of the men wore beards. It seemed half the population did, and almost all had dark hair. He sat in front of Woolworth's and watched as people walked down the main street. One thing he decided could not be disguised was the Marines' walk. They usually had a quick, firm pace that was regimented. Now, instead of watching faces, he concentrated on watching feet. Of the many who passed him, a few had the gait he was looking for. Now, what else could he use as a guide? From his own experience, he knew that military people were fanatical about a straight gable line. The line from the shirt, buckle, and fly should all be vertical. Would that instinct also be there? He made notes of the people he had noted by their stride and checked the gig line. A few more matched, but by accident or design, he wasn't sure. What else could he go by? The sun was beginning to set, and Rocky decided to head over to the YMCA and do a few laps in the pool. He'd been spending a lot more time with Agnes, and she was continually feeding him whenever he showed. If he tried to turn down anything she offered, she got such a hurt look that he usually ended up asking for seconds. He was starting to put on weight. A daily swim and workout usually kept him in form, but it took a lot more effort to do so. After 25 laps in the pool, he felt warmed up enough to start on the weights. Bench presses were his usual start, and he loaded up the bar with enough to challenge himself, but not enough to bulk out. He liked the firm, lean look with the hip strength hidden. As he finished and was plating the weights, he heard someone call for a spotter. He looked over and saw someone had taken over his bench, and the load on the bar was impressive. He positioned himself behind and assisted him to lift and ready. Rocky marveled at the man's power as he did a lift after lift without strain. When he needed an assist for the last few, Rocky was ready to help return the load out to the rest. The man thanked Rocky, and as he dropped his sleeve over muscular arms, Rocky noticed a lion's head tattoo on the bicep. Rocky finished his workout without incident and proceeded to the locker room. A quick shower, and he was headed into the dining room. Dinner was stuffed peppers, mashed potatoes, and greens. When you get the why, there isn't much in the way of choice, but what was served was usually pretty good. Rocky ate slowly and watched his tables filled. It seemed that quite a few of the older inhabitants of town found the Y a good place to come in the evening. Tables filled quickly, and it seemed most of the diners were regulars and friends. The man who Rocky had spotted was looking around for a place to sit when Rocky let a shrill whistle out. The man acknowledged Rocky and wound his way to the table. Once seated, the two men ate in silence. When the man finished, Rocky felt it might be a good time to begin introductions. He never got beyond opening his mouth. The man nodded at Rocky and went to the table to turn his tray. Stretching as he made his way towards the rooms, Rocky saw the lion tattoo was exposed again. Whoever did the work was an artist, but it seemed that the coloring was just a little off in places. For the next day, Rocky spent most of his time on the bench outside Woolworth's or walking around. He started noticing the tattoos the men had. He chided himself for automatically assuming that the man was in town. He could have fled for parts unknown. But his own feelings matched those of Morgan, and he was sure the guy had stayed local. In the diner for lunch, he brought out a pad and started trying to place himself in the man's position. What would he do in order to fade out of sight? He was a Marine, so living rough wouldn't be a problem. He'd need time to grow the beard and mustache. He'd only taken a modicum of money, so what clothes he needed he'd have to, steal or beg off people. Food? Well, that was harder. Either he would snare it or fish for it, or find odd jobs around farms to earn money to buy it. He crossed off any reference to stealing. He felt sure that this guy wouldn't steal things. He stopped off and made a list of who had clothes missing. A couple of them were men's clothes. Since these could be replaced, the man might have considered the acquisition merely borrowing. He stopped off to speak to the person who had reported them missing. Mrs. Wheeler was apparently still upset about the theft and launched straight into her attack. I don't know what this country is coming to, but I don't like it. They took my husband's logging pants and a brand new flannel shirt. Some hobo comes in and out on the trains, most like. Sheriff Morgan ought to keep a better eye out. Hobos, tramps, all the same in my book, though they say hobos are supposed to be the better of the two. Can't say I see much difference in a man without a place to stay and enough money in his pocket. Self-respect, he don't have to beg or steal. Rocky made motions as though he was jotting notes on his pad as she went on and beat a quick retreat. He heard more than enough and, feeling in need of some calmer company, headed out to see Agnes. He was surprised to see her coming from the lake with a line of fish. She'd had a good day, apparently. Grinning from ear to ear, she waved them in the air when she saw Rocky walking towards her. Rushing to her side, he gallantly offered to carry the basket and tackle. The fish she wouldn't release. Hold on, sir. Okay, in the kitchen, she laid the fish out and prepared to fillet them. Rocky rolled up his sleeves to help, only to have his hand smacked when he reached for a fish. You skinned the ones you caught. She smirked as Rocky sat at the table and meekly watched her. Well, tell me about your day fishing, he prompted as he got out his notepad to work on his notes. She continued filleting as she talked. Oh, it was grand weather, best we've had in a while. I got these early enough that there were only a couple other people out. One might have been darn near a professional with waders and boots. He must have been hot and I get him. Funny though, he was just using a stick, string, and a hook made out of a pin, so I lent him one of my poles. He got one big trout and quit. Said he only fishes enough to catch a meal and then stops. After he left, there were just a couple on the far side of the lake. They were the ones we had met in the diner, so I had a spot all to myself. You just don't know how peaceful it is fishing. She picked up the last one. It was twice as big as the others, and she shook it and glared at it with fierce eyes. Oh my goodness, sorry. With fierce eyes. Except for you, you put up a heck of a fight. I got you in the end. She finished cleaning it and mixed up flour and seasonings into a bowl. Giving them all a thorough coat, she laid the fish on strips of newspaper and then wrapped them in foil. Sticking them in the fridge, she washed her hands thoroughly. Rocky was making notes on his pad and had only half heard her discourse on the wonders of her fishing expedition. She came up behind him and placed her hands under his nose. Do I smell like fish? He inhaled deeply and shook his head. Kissing her hands, he pulled her around for a proper kiss. When they parted, she whispered in his ear, Will you be stopping by for dinner tonight, or are you content with the so-called food at the YMCA? If I'm invited, I'd love it. Those fish look delicious, and seeing you makes my days even better. He kissed her again, then went out to check in at the Y. He had an idea about the guy he'd seen yesterday and wanted to check him out again. Seated at an L bench, he was working with some dumbbells when the man in question grabbed a couple of 100-pound dumbbells and started doing curls. As the bicep bulged, she saw the tattoo prominently again. When the bright light reflected off the mirror, the line was in sharp relief. The lips and the nose stood out as slightly faded, more so than the rest. Realizing they formed the shape of an anchor, Rocky decided on his next course of action. He thought a compassionate approach should work best. As the man finished his workout, Rocky followed him into the locker room. Changing quickly, he waited outside in the lounge until his quarry emerged. The man arrived quickly and headed off to his room. Rocky interrupted him, asking for a moment of his time. Rocky introduced himself and got right down to what he wanted. "My name's Rocky Stone of the Sentinel, and I want to help you." The man raised an eyebrow but didn't offer to introduce himself. "I don't need any help." He turned to walk away. Rocky reached out and caught at the man's arm. Stern tone entered his voice. "Think of your family, then." A right cross to the face, and Rocky staggered back, landing on the floor. The man made a dash for his room, groaning deeply. Rocky saw pretty well which room he went into as the fire door closed. Rocky cursed himself for the stupid way he had handled things. "I guess I'd better bring Morgan into it." He called Sheriff Morgan and asked him to come round to the Y and help talk some sense into Jack Wheeler. Morgan shook his head and agreed he'd handle it badly. Approaching the door, the sheriff knocked and announced, "Jack." "Sheriff Morgan, I'd like to talk to you in a minute." The door opened and the man let them in. The room was small as a jail cell. Bed, desk, and one chair were all the furnishings. What little personal items the man had were scattered around and didn't amount to much. Morgan sat on the edge of the bed and spoke soothingly. "Jack, Rocky's sorry for the way he handled this, but we need to clear up a few things. Why'd you disappear like that?" The man addressed as Jack looked up with red-rimmed eyes as though he'd been crying. "I couldn't face it anymore. I just needed to get away from everything. It was too much all at once. I didn't even want to remember." Morgan squatted in front of Jack. "Son, you can't mean you don't want to remember your family. Sometimes they're the only reason a man has to keep going." The man looked up. "I know, but when they died, I lost that reason." "Died?" The man slumped in his chair. "It's been 2 years now since they all died in a car crash. I left everything and walked away. I've been running ever since." Rocky was about to interrupt and Morgan held out a hand. "Well, son, I think I understand how you feel. I lost my wife in a car accident, too. But what about the rest of your family? Don't you think they're concerned about you?" "Yeah, I'm sure my mom and dad are plenty worried. They've been too clear in the head. That's why they kicked me out of the Navy. I get confused. I had to cover up my tattoo so people wouldn't see it and ask questions about my time. Well, then my wife and kids dying like that sent me over the edge. I've tried to commit suicide a few times, but can't even do that right. Guess I'm just a coward." Morgan asked his name. "Jack Horner, or John Horner, but most folks just calls me Jack." Morgan patted Jack on the shoulder and let the man have his cry out. When he recovered, Morgan had a good idea of his next move. "Son, pack your things. I'm taking you home." The man looked up gratefully and threw his clothes and folding clock into a duffel. Rocky stayed with him while Morgan went to check if the man owed anything. Paying the meager bill, he escorted Jack to the squad car and drove him to his parents' house. In the back seat, Rocky wrote a short excerpt for the Sentinel about John Horner returning home. The door of the large farmhouse flung open and a middle-aged woman raced out the side of John. At the door, the father fought back tears as the son walked unsteadily up the path with his arm around his mother. The sheriff and Rocky waved and left them to get reacquainted. At the sight of Rocky's face, Agnes lay him on the couch with a stake covering his eyes. She kissed his forehead, lightly smacked him upside the head for getting the black eye in the first place. She went to the kitchen to fry the fish. Morgan instructed Rocky on how to deal with someone in a case like this. "Rocky, you can't start out as if you're in charge unless it's called for. A case like this needs sympathy and understanding. You need to start concerned and helpful. You saw what happened when you tried to muscle in. He didn't take it well, especially when you mentioned family. And I can't say I blame him, all things considered. If you don't have all the information, go slow. Ask leading questions and follow up with what they bring out. As a reporter, I thought that would be second nature to you." Rocky sat up, holding the stake in place. "Well, I guess I figured a Marine would respond better to a firm approach." Except he wasn't a Marine. And remember, they're people first, military after. Called into the kitchen for dinner, they told Agnes about John Horner and the welcome he got on going home last night. Agnes related her fishing expedition, which Rocky had only heard the smallest part of the first time. Rocky explained how he got the black eye using the wrong approach. Dinner finished, Rocky astonished Agnes by clearing the table and starting to wash dishes. Picking up the towel, she joined him at the sink, wiping and stacking. They sang Sweet By and By as they cleaned, with Morgan still in the front room reading, providing the bass notes. On the porch saying their goodbyes, Agnes promised to stop by early in the morning to take Rocky fishing. Rocky was woken by a knocking at the door. Opening it sleepily, he was only dimly aware of Agnes in the moonlight. But seeing he was still in pajamas, she told him to do a quick wash, brush, and get dressed. She had made sandwiches and brought a large thermos of strong coffee. Freshly shaved and dressed and slightly more awake, he took up the basket as Agnes gathered the poles. On her hip was a small woven basket that contained everything they'd need for a morning's fishing. At the lake, Rocky marveled at the fair amount of people up at this ungodly hour. Granted, from his sample last night, the fish were worth the effort. His mind dwelt on the firm flesh and excellent taste of the dinner. Do you want me to bait your hook? Agnes had been holding out a rod to him, and he hadn't noticed. Sorry, my mind was elsewhere. Competently hooking the worm to the line, he cast towards the center of the lake, where a constant movement on the surface intimated that fish were plentiful. He sat comfortably on the shore with a cup of strong coffee at hand to warm him up. Agnes was seated on the stump and munching on half a ham sandwich. A rustling and the sound of twigs snapping announced that another fisher had approaching. A man in dark waders and a warm shirt approached from the bushes. In the dim light, his face was almost invisible behind long hair and a beard and mustache. He greeted Agnes with a "Hello again, ma'am." It was the tone of the ma'am that made Rocky snap. It was not said the way most people said it around town. It was an inflection that was distinctly military. He wanted to see the newcomer's face, but in the darkness it was impossible. The light from the lantern was not sufficient. Agnes nudged him when she saw that he had a catch and he was ignoring. Rapidly bringing it ashore, he tied it off to a stake so it would stay fresh in the water. Rocky had his fish, so he loaned the newcomer his rod. As the man took it, Rocky saw a unique tattoo across the man's chest. A wicker basket with a box, a female rabbit holding a newborn, 3 males and 1 female bunny. In the glow from the lantern, Rocky thought he could see an anchor woven into the basket. That and the image explained a lot, and Rocky was sure he had the right man this time. The problem now lay how to handle it. He felt it was almost lucky, as he had screwed up the first time. Morgan had given him good advice on how to handle a situation like this. He just hoped he could follow the advice without screwing things up. As the man fished, he sat down and grew more relaxed. Rocky offered him a cup of coffee, which was gratefully accepted. Rocky was a little shaky on how to begin, but figured on a subtle, direct approach. "So, how you been keeping, Jack?" The man shrugged. "Doing all right, I guess." Agnes turned slowly. "Jack? Jack Wheeler?" The man started and tried to stand, but flopped down again. Now that they knew who he was, it was as if all the fight had gone out of him. He dropped the pole and put his head in his hands. Agnes squatted next to him and put her arms around his shoulder. Rocky moved closer. "It's all right, Jack," he said simply. "Saying Marines don't cry is pure BS." Jack tried to choke back the tears, but after fighting it so long, he finally broke down. Shamefully at first, but easier as the tears flowed. "I want to go home. I don't know how to, though. The hurt I've done to Mary and the kids, she'll never forgive me." Rocky was thinking hard. What was needed was some kind of cover story. But looking at the man's face in the early morning sun, it was clear that wasn't the way, though. He'd done and been through enough, and if Rocky pressed him to lie, the lie wouldn't hold. It'd show in his face in an instant. Rocky squatted in front of Jack and put a hand on his shoulder. Jack, you were stressed and overwhelmed. You're human and it happens. But you were careful enough to make sure that they were provided for. Your wife and kids are only concerned with getting you back home. I spoke to your wife before I began, and she wants you back. Your kids are expecting you to come home any time now. Hell, it won't get any easier if you wait longer. Rocky watched in amazement as the former Marine shone through. The shoulders squared and the head rose. Jack had made his decision. He asked Agnes and Rocky to follow him. Leading them through a twisted path, he ended at his temporary home. It was a built-up duck blind that was austere but reasonably comfortable. A small can stove held a coffee pot, a single skillet rested on a ledge. There were several novels resting on a small stump. The bed was a woven grass mat lying over a mound with another woven mat acting as his cover. Rocky took several pictures at Jack's request to be held until called for. Agnes filled a cardboard box with his belongings and led them to Rocky's truck. She promised she would hold onto his objects until he wanted them back. Stopping half a block away, Jack got out. Agnes and Rocky stood beside him as he gathered his courage. Shaking Rocky's hand and giving Agnes a hug, he squared his shoulders and walked the rest of the way. Seated in the car, they waited. When a scream of delight and shouts of "Daddy's home" reached them, they knew it was time to leave. Rocky closed the case with Morgan. The state police were notified that Jack had returned, and Rocky explained what happened to his editor. They all agreed that there would be no story about it in the Sentinel, at least if or until Jack Wheeler okayed it. Okay, so that was Cold Cases. Next one is A Flame Rekindled, and that is what we will be reading in a few days. Today is Monday, so probably Wednesday. Excuse me. I hope you are enjoying these. If you are, please let me know. Please comment. Tell me if you like them. Tell me if you don't. Tell me what you'd like to hear. Tell me a new book to write. If you're an author and you want me to read your stories on here, let me know. I met a few authors. I can't talk now. I've met a few authors on LinkedIn, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to read the books that I really have enjoyed. So I'll even buy it just so I can have it, because I've got quite a few here that I've read and enjoyed so much I want them on my shelves to read again. So I look forward to seeing you again next reading. Hope you come back for more readings. I hope you have seen some of the ones I've done previously with, as I said, these authors that I've met. There's some pretty unusual ones. So take a look. Let me know what you think and get your copies. Thanks again, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.